Welcome again to OCR Sociology Heaven. The term subculture is one of the first things that you will see on this specification for OCR A-level sociology. And in this respect, it's really important that you have a very good understanding as well as be able to provide some examples of what subculture is and some of the different subcultures that we see in the UK and across the world. So today I want to look at what the hipster subculture is and then think about why it is an example of subculture. So the hipster subculture is a youth subculture that supposedly began around the 1990s, and it's synonymous with parts of East London such as Shoreditch and areas of New York as well. The school that I currently work in is very, very close to Shoreditch, and so myself and my students are fortunate enough to be able to see the hipster subculture, and that's very, very useful because as sociologists we can start to identify and start to examine parts of the subculture that make it very, very distinct. So, what styles then, tastes, values, ideals make up this particular subculture? So if you are part of the hipster subculture, or if you are a hipster, then you are normally a white millennial. Now, that means that you were born in an era that made you a young adult when the 2000s began. Okay, so if you were born perhaps in 1980, you'd be turning 20 when the 2000s or the millennium started, and that is often associated with the hipster. So, hipsters are between maybe 20 and late 30s, something like that. They tend to live in urban areas, they are independent thinkers, they're really into alternative music, perhaps indie music, and one of the most distinctive aspects of their style is that they usually buy their clothes from vintage or thrift stores. Okay, so it's nothing is mainstream that they wear. You're never going to see these types of clothes necessarily in some of the mainstream outlets. They have progressive political views, they're into organic or local producers, artisanal foods. They reside in gentrifying neighbourhoods, so neighbourhoods like Shoreditch that are up and coming. And things like beards, you'll notice in the picture that man's got a real grizzly beard, so this is very common. They like to cycle single-speed bicycles, and they like to think of themselves as anything but mainstream. Okay, so these are some of the traits, characteristics, values, or ideals that make up this particular subculture. Again, here we have another picture or stereotypical image of a hipster. You can see the bicycle there, the beard, the style of clothing. So, why is it a subculture? In what respect is it a subculture, and what makes it a subculture? Well, we know that a subculture is a minority part of a majority culture. So, the hipster subculture, they are a minority in our majority culture. They actually buy into the wider cultural values that we have, things like health, money, achievement, competition, all these values that we think are important. But they have their very, very own separate, distinct norms and values, which make them very, very different and very distinct. Okay, so nearly finished, but I just want to give you a couple of interesting points about hipsters. So hipsters themselves, they're unlikely to identify themselves as being hipsters because by that very identification, you are saying that you are part of a collective and that you are part of something perhaps that is mainstream. And that is the very essence of their subculture, that they are far from mainstream. They are very much not mainstream. So you'll rarely hear a hipster identify themselves as a hipster. And I'm sure if somebody did, a real hipster would say that they are not a hipster, if that makes any sense. And secondly, one other interesting point with subcultures is that often subcultures have tried to rebel against this idea of capitalism in the past. For example, the skinhead subculture in the 70s, 80s was really an expression of rebellion against capitalism. But capitalism has a way of diffusing some of these subcultures. So what they do is they incorporate and commercialize the idea of the skinhead or the idea of the hipster, and they start to sell these things in mainstream shops, or the merchandise that they sell becomes mainstream, and other people who are not technically hipsters or skinheads actually buy into this idea, and so they can get some of the merchandise from mainstream outlets. And as a result of this diffuses the subculture and makes it more mainstream. And so, interestingly, capitalism actually manages to diffuse some of these subcultures so that they don't actually have such dominance within society. Okay, so that's one interesting point, and Dick Hebdige was the sociologist that identified this particular point. So, there are various examples of this, but certainly in Shoreditch there are commercial outlets that sell single-speed bicycles that are very minimalist in their appearance, and this is very, very synonymous with the hipster subculture. But you can see now how capitalism is getting a hold of this idea, as well as some of the outlets like American Apparel. They're buying into the hipster image and selling clothes that are very similar to the clothes that you would see a hipster wearing. And so, a lot of people are saying that as a result of this, the hipster subculture is actually dying out, because the very essence of their ideals is that they are not mainstream, and as a result of capitalism, they are becoming mainstream. And so you can see that it's very, very it's something that they certainly don't associate themselves with. So people are saying that the hipster subculture is actually dying out. Okay, that's enough. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot more information on the hipster subculture. If you want to experience it for real, you can come to Shoreditch, that particular part of town, and you will see people like this wandering around the town. Okay, hopefully that helps, and we'll see you next time.